Welcome back, everybody, to the You Ask We podcast, the show where you ask the questions, they answer them, and I'm just a guy in the middle. And this week, we have an amazing guest, formerly a deputy public defender in Los Angeles County. He is now considered one of the top criminal defense attorneys in Los Angeles, and he also lends his legal expertise on a variety of TV programs as a legal analyst and commentator. He's been seen on Entertainment Tonight, NBC News, The Today Show, LA Times, Forbes, you name it. I want to give a warm welcome to Mr. Lou Shapiro. Lou, how's everything?
All right, doing good. Thank you for that intro. I feel like I can do anything now.
Of course, we try to do our research here. So yeah, the way the show works is everyone submits questions, but the first question always comes from me, and that's what's new? What's going on?
What's new? Well, a lot of things are new. We have county, city, where it seems like every day there's more crime out there. People don't feel safe walking their dogs, going to stores. We have a homelessness crisis out of control. And what all that's leading to, in addition to COVID, is the courts are just backlogged. There's cases that haven't been handled in years, and there's new cases being filed, and there's a mental health crisis that the courts aren't equipped to deal with these many cases. We have Compton Courthouse is just flooded. That's been closed now for some time. So cases are getting diverted from there to another courthouse. And it's an election year with the district attorneys are running. So we'll see what happens there. So a lot of changes, a lot of volatility, and a lot of uncertainty. And people are hoping for a better year, better outcome, better economy, more safety. But who knows if that's going to happen anytime soon. So that's what's going on.
Yeah, so your answer, to sum it up in one word, chaos. Just
Basically, yeah.
That's good. But end of the day, we're still here. That's all that matters. So yeah, let's get into some of these questions. This first one comes from Lily, and this one's mainly about your background. She's asking, what made you want to go into criminal law, and more specifically, what made you want to go into defense?
Sure. So it's a common question we get. So interestingly, most lawyers, when they graduate law school, do not want to go into criminal defense because one is they feel that if somebody did something wrong, then they would have an ethical dilemma in being able to zealously advocate, which is demanded on us by the Constitution and just by society. That's what we're here to do. And then number two is in order to do criminal law, you have to be willing and able to think on your feet, run court to court, make quick split second decisions. So a lot of people don't want to be under the gun like that. They want to know they can come to an office, they can think things through carefully all the time. If it's doing a contract, they know how to get to the end of the contract. So it's a criminal law is a different animal like that. But the lawyers that do criminal law are drawn to it for that reason. I don't want to be behind a desk all day. In fact, I just got back to my desk from a courthouse out of Orange County. I was in the LAX courthouse in the morning handling a few matters, and then Orange County courthouse in the afternoon defending a 14-year-old charged with swatting on a temple and a church. So it runs the gamut, and it's the uncertainty, it's the element of surprise, it's the competitive nature of the field. You're trying to win, you're trying to get a good outcome. All that is what draws me into it. And finally, just seeing it on television, that to me, the criminal defense attorney was always the hero. The prosecutor, people know what the prosecutor is going to argue. They're going to argue the facts meet the elements of the crime. Everyone knows what the judge is going to do. The judge is going to rule whether something's a ball or a strike and allow certain evidence in and not allow certain evidence in and decide sentencing if it gets there. But really what the jury and everybody in the room is really looking at is the criminal defense attorney. They say, amuse me. What do you got in your bag? We got to sit here a week or two missing work. Make it worth our while. Show us why you think we should be sitting here and not at work because of what your client allegedly did or is accused of. And that's a big ask. That's a lot of pressure on us. But again, we do what we do because we enjoy the pressure. We try to rise to the occasion and deliver that victory when possible.
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely a really big struggle, especially when it comes to having the burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt. I feel like that can always be a struggle in regards to like criminal defense specifically. So it's like you're saying most people tend to like stray away from like the pressure that comes to that. You wanted to focus on it head on.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We always use that term in conversation, and we talk about the law. It sounds like almost like a beautiful thing. Innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, and you have to prove the person guilty, not just by preponderance of the evidence or by clear and convincing evidence, not those standards, but beyond any reasonable doubt. That means if you have a small little doubt, even if it's 1%, that maybe the person didn't do it, you have to acquit. And it sounds like most people are never going to get convicted then. But I can tell you from experience, if a jury doesn't like the person, doesn't like the case, just doesn't like certain facts, or for other reasons, they will overlook the law and they will just convict because they think they should convict. They want to teach a person a lesson, even though they have some doubt. Or they'll convict because they want to go home and it's a Friday and they're done. They just want to get this over with. And more people are voting guilty than not guilty, and they don't want things to drag out. And it's important as a criminal defense attorney that we tell our clients, because the client will be like, how are they going to convict me? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I go, hold on, not so simple. All right, it's true, and we say it, but it's not so simple. And that can work both ways too. You can have a case that's really bad on the facts, and you think it's not a winnable case, but then sometimes jurors will find that reasonable doubt in there when even you don't think it's so clear cut. So it can run both ways, but it's certainly it's more of, I say, theoretical than it is practical.
Really interesting. Wow. Um, yeah, so this next question comes from Chris. Speaking of, challenges within work, within this field, Chris wants to know what is, in your opinion, the most challenging case you've worked on in the past, if you could share.
Yeah, look, in terms of challenging, it's because we handle so many types of cases, whether it's money laundering or domestic violence, possession of unlawful material, weapons cases. They all present difficulties in different ways. Sometimes it's a difficult case because of what's on the line for the client. Like I represented a lawyer last year who was charged with real estate fraud, and he's a real estate lawyer. And fortunately, we got him acquitted of all 14 felony counts. The Daily Law Journal wrote about it. And even though the facts of the case weren't that difficult to deal with, but he was a nice guy and we became friendly in the case. And just knowing what was on the line for him, that he could, if we lost the case, that he would lose his license to practice law, uh, it really got to me. And when the verdict was read not guilty, I cried on him and he cried on me. It was very, very emotional. And so it's like he wasn't looking at life in prison. He was looking at significant time, but it was because of what, I kind of saw a little bit I guess of myself and him. This could have been anybody, a fellow member of the state bar is because I know how hard it is to become a lawyer. And I saw everything was on the line for him. So to me, that really spoke to me, his case. So that's just one example, but they come in all shapes and forms. It's hard for me to just say, this is the case that was the most difficult.
Yeah. Like basically you're saying it's like the challenge can be like different for each case. Like sometimes it's emotionally taxing, other times it's like actually like a tough case to like figure out. Like it can just vary.
Precisely.
All right. So yeah, this next question, it comes from Brian. Um he's wondering because like I've actually been curious about this too for a while. What is it like sitting down with clients for these criminal cases? Like have you ever gotten into any scary situations like sitting down with them trying to figure out your case, things like that?
That's also a common question I get. See, most of my cases, I'd say I represent really good people that have a really bad day. So it's a doctor or lawyer or accountant, someone that really probably has had no run-ins with the law in their life, and just suddenly they made a bad decision that day. They got behind the wheel after drinking something, or it wasn't alcohol related. They just drove and they hit somebody walking this crossing the street and didn't stop because they panicked. It could be a dentist that's in a bad relationship with somebody, a domestic violence relationship, and their license is on the line. There's all sorts of different types of cases that can come up. Uh, and I'm not scared of anybody because they're all professionals like me. And but they're having a bad day and they need somebody to come in and try to get them back to where they were before this whole situation came into being. So that's the best answer I have to that question. So
I
I'm
mean,
not scared of my clients.
that's a nice way to look at it. I mean, was it like that also when you were a public defender as well? Or
Yeah, even as a public defender, even I was doing more gang cases then. Oftentimes I'm their last bit of hope. So the last person they're going to turn on is their criminal defense attorney because that's the only person listening to them at that point. Everyone else in society has wrote them off, their family, their friends, the government. So when you're looking at that person across you and they're all you got, they're not going to turn on you usually.
yeah, I mean, I feel like with this question, I feel like a lot of people like see it through a Law and Order lens, where it's like TV will like have that effect where like people will think like, oh, like these clients will like turn on people, but not really. Like we're their like last resort, so they're not gonna. I hear you. Cool.
Yeah.
So this next question comes from Jessica. In your opinion, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of the role of a criminal defense lawyer?
Yeah. So I think the most misunderstood aspect is people say to me, some people say, how do you defend those people? How do you do that? As if like I'm defending a villain and here's my answer to that. A lot of these cases, I'm not always trying to clear the person's record necessarily. Sometimes it's just getting them from a felony to a misdemeanor, or getting them from a misdemeanor to an infraction, or getting a situation of a mental health diversion where they avoid a conviction by getting mental health treatment. It's not just magically getting people out of situations. It's taking a situation that somebody is in a crisis in their life and saying, I'm going to do what I can to make it better for you. And we'll do the best we can. And here are strategies in doing that. And no matter what somebody did, however bad it is, the Constitution says everybody has a right to counsel. And oftentimes our role is just to make sure that they get treated fairly by the justice system, not to get them a get out of jail free card necessarily, but to make sure that if they're supposed to do 10 years, they're not doing 20 years. To make sure that people aren't railroaded by a vulnerable system or a powerful government. And I can tell you from experience that the government, whether it's state or federal, has a lot of power. When I meet with young lawyers and they want to go into criminal law, I encourage them just as much to be a prosecutor as I do to be a defense attorney because prosecutors have a lot of power and they can do a lot of good on their end for clients, however we are representing on our end. And oftentimes, if a courtroom is staffed with a reasonable prosecutor and reasonable defense attorney, really good things can happen in that courtroom overall. And lastly, uh, when that same person asks me, how do you do what you do? How do you defend those people? Oftentimes I'll get a call from them that their uncle or someone they know actually did get into trouble, have a bad day, and say, Lou, please help this person out. And then after I help the person out and they have an understanding, a personal experience with this and understand what went into it, then they change after they go, now I see why the system needs criminal defense attorneys. It's not about getting the villains off. It's about you guys are the last stop for justice. We're making sure that the system is working the way it should. We are the checks and balances on the government. And that's how I see our role.
Yeah, and I mean, I love how you brought up that misconception specifically because that was actually one of the questions that someone sent in anonymously. So it's great that you answered that already. And I also want to say it's like I love how you brought up how you try to like tell people like, hey, prosecution is great also because I don't know if you saw this episode. A few episodes I brought on Benny Forer, who's a deputy district attorney at the DA office, which is like big in prosecution. And despite the fact that you guys are basically doing opposite things, like one is defending, one is prosecuting, despite all that, it's with the same goal in mind, which is just making society better as a whole. So it's like it's just really interesting how it's like those two like opposites can collide for the same mission.
Yeah, and Benny and I are friends. And it was a great episode. I did watch it. And he said, when we run into each other in the hallways of the courtroom, we're friends, we embrace, we catch up on life, and then we go into the courtroom. And if we have a case together, we are professionals. And he knows what I'm trying to do, and I know what he's trying to do. And yeah, it works out well when you have that kind of teamwork going on.
Yeah, shout out Benny for so yeah, let's a few people sent anonymous questions like I mentioned before, so let's get into some of them. Um this one is asking how did you get involved in media? Like moving on to the media side of things. How did you get involved in media as a legal commentator, and how do you balance your legal practice with, making time for like coming on the news?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Uh, the way I got into it is when I left the public defender's office after about 4 to 5 years. I wanted to start my own practice, and then I needed people in the public to know that I'm here, I'm available, and how do I do that? So it was as I was going down the steps, it was the same day as what it was the Michael Jackson criminal trial where his doctor was on trial for manslaughter for causing the death of Michael Jackson in a negligible way. And there were a lot of cameras all over the courthouse. And I was looking for one that didn't have a correspondent to talk about the case. And I saw one, it's called Sky News, based out of Europe. So I went over to them and I said, hey, do you need someone to give you an explanation on this case? And they said, yeah, actually, we do. Have you done this before? I said, well, sort of. I think I've answered questions like this before. They said, okay, Mike, come up, let's give him a shot. And that was my first interview in a sense that I'm talking to millions of people across the world in Europe, explaining how this case works. And that's where I got my first film, and other people saw that film, and I sent it to some networks too. And then it took off from there. They're like, this guy is good for this stuff. He's quick, he answers the questions, makes it easy to understand, and we're going to keep him on. And what's funny is I used to have to go into the studio a lot. And then when COVID hit, news still continued, and Zoom became popular and acceptable to do interviews that way. So now I've just been doing a lot of these interviews on my phone. It could be in my car outside of the courthouse, in a Starbucks. And that's how I'm able to find the time to do it, to answer that second question. I don't have to drive to the studio anymore. That was more time consuming. But now that I can just take out my phone and do it, it's really not a distraction. I don't have to audition in a sense. So we don't do any takes beforehand. We just jump right into it and knock it out.
Yeah, and I mean honestly, it's like the way society has just changed overall since COVID. Like people are basically doing everything from home now. Like it makes a lot of sense that you're able to like do both a lot easier, especially with the fact that you can just call in and things like that. Um, and it's also really cool how you brought up that the first case was the Michael Jackson doctor manslaughter case, because I'm actually curious about this myself personally because the news very recently came out about this. If you're not able to talk about it, I can cut this out, no worries. But like the news about Alec Baldwin that came out, how like they gave him and the armorer on set an involuntary manslaughter charge, and like SAG-AFTRA is like um making like a complaint about it. I just wanted to know like what are your thoughts on the whole situation? Do you think it was a rightful sentence? Do you think it wasn't? Why not?
So I'm following the Baldwin case closely, and it's a very polarized case. Again, this quick facts of it is that Baldwin was filming a movie, and it was a Western movie. They hired an armorist on the set to be in charge of the weapons, and the armorist handed the gun to one person on the set and told that person on the set that it's a clean weapon, meaning it's got nothing in it. And that second person handed it to Baldwin, telling him the same thing. And when Baldwin fired it, unfortunately and tragically, it killed somebody. So the argument by the prosecution is that Baldwin was negligent in how he handled the firearm. He should have taken more care and caution in handling it, and had he done so, it would have avoided the death of somebody else. And this, it's a tough one. The standard is what's called, what would a reasonable person do in that situation? Because that's what these jury instructions come down to. Like in law school, what is the reasonable person standard? Would a reasonable person in Baldwin's shoes have checked that chamber before using the weapon? That's really what it all comes down to.
Mhm.
Some people will tell you, most people that don't use weapons, I find, will say he hired an expert, an armorist. If the armorist, what's the point of hiring an expert if you can't rely on them? That's the job of the expert. I say you had one job, to keep the set safe. So everyone can understand how the armorist is charged. But why is Baldwin charged if the armorist is basically not competent, is the argument.
Mhm.
And the other side is people that tend to use weapons more will say, have told me, they go, anyone who uses weapons knows you never point a gun at anybody, whether it's loaded or not loaded. You just don't do that. That's a hard no if anyone's had weapon training. So if that's the reasonable person standard, then that's not looking good for Baldwin. So that's a clear-cut case of, depending on who the jury is, you could have very different outcomes in terms of what they think should be the right way to vote in that kind of case. And we'll see what happens on it. It could go to trial, and who knows what a jury will do. But it will come down to, I think, experts in that kind of case.
That's awesome. That's really, wow. That's insane. So yeah, let's get into this last anonymous question. This one's asking, was there a time that your legal expertise helped clarify misconceptions presented in media about a legal issue? So it's kind of like what we were talking about like just now, like basically like, oh, like someone who hasn't used a gun before would say, oh, like there's the armorist and all that stuff. So it's like, is there any time your legal opinion cleared a misconception about a case in the media?
Yeah, I'm sure it has. I haven't heard it directly from the viewer to say, hey, because I've watched your interview, I now see the case in a different way. But but I can say that oftentimes when I post these news videos, let's say on my stories or on my Facebook timeline, I will get back channel questions from people to say, oh, I didn't know that. How, and follow-up questions based on that. So it tells me that people do appreciate legal commentary because it gives them an insight into a case that they don't know much about.
Awesome. Amazing. And yeah, so based on all that, the way the show works is the first question always comes from me, and the last question also always comes from me. And that last question is, if you had to give one piece of advice to the people watching at home, what would you say?
Yeah, so when you ask a criminal lawyer that question, one piece of advice, there's so many scenarios that come up that it's hard to couch it into one. But here's what I would say. That a lot of people, and we spoke about this earlier in the show a little bit. A lot of people look at the criminal lawyer as maybe the person who's, I don't know about sleazy, but's got something up their sleeve, or is not quite genuine, or practices fast and loose, disorganized because of that show that people watch, Better Call Saul.
Mm.
So that sometimes that gives stereotypes to lawyers. And I'll tell you this, that criminal lawyers, you often, if you watch them in action in court and trial, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about anyone that does this kind of work. It is oftentimes very selfless work, because the results that we get for people, sometimes our clients don't even fully appreciate how good they are. Not that they don't show gratitude, but they can't be expected to know sometimes that how great an outcome is, because they never had another case to compare it to. So the criminal lawyers out there are heroes. They're working really hard, especially the ones that represent people in death penalty cases, capital cases, the public defender's office. These are unsung heroes. There's no amount of money you can pay these people to do what they do. And so the next time you meet somebody who's a criminal lawyer, you know, just maybe thank them for what they do. It is contributing to society. It really is. It's the checks and balances on the system. I think it's good for everyone to hear it because I don't think they get enough thanks from people. And firefighters get thanked, police officers get thanked. Criminal lawyers don't get so much thanks from the community, but they really are doing a public service.
Mhm. Yeah, be thankful, ladies and gentlemen. Lou, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it so much. If you guys like this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. If you guys want to follow with the show, see who's coming on next, stuff like that, all my links are going to be down below as well. If you guys want to check out what's going on with Lou, I'm going to put his links down below as well. And with that, this has been the You Ask Me podcast. This has been Lou Shapiro. My name is Ed in Toronto, and I'll see you next week. Y'all.
Yeah.